There's something most people never question because it's been taught since the very beginning. The idea that the world exists outside, separate and completely independent from what's happening inside. And because this idea is so widely accepted, so normal, no one stops to look at how deeply it shapes the way life is experienced. When things go wrong, the first instinct is to fix the situation, to find the cause out there, to react and solve and survive. But what if this very mindset is the root of all that frustration? What if the world isn't outside you the way you think it is? What if it's actually responding to you, shaped by the invisible tone of your inner world? If that's true, and it is, then everything changes. Because if the world reflects the energy, the beliefs, the identity you hold within, then fixing the outside without looking inside is like wiping a mirror and hoping your expression will change. It's backwards, and most people live their entire lives doing that, arguing with their reflection, yelling at the echo, trying to shift the outer world while remaining stuck in the same inner state. But once this illusion is shattered, a new kind of awareness starts to settle in. You start to notice the patterns. You see that the same types of situations keep repeating, that no matter how hard you try, you keep ending up in familiar places emotionally. And it's not because life is unfair, it's because life is echoing you. The state you're dwelling in, the identity you're wearing, the energy you're broadcasting, it's not judging you, it's just reflecting you. That's all it ever does. And that realization isn't meant to make you feel guilty or responsible for everything that's ever gone wrong. It's meant to wake you up to the power you've always had, the power no one ever told you about, the power to go within and gently shift the thoughts, the reactions, the assumptions that have been on autopilot. Because the outer world can't help but bow to your inner shift. It doesn't have a choice. That's how the mirror works. It never leads, it only follows. So instead of trying harder to change the outside, you begin to soften inward, listening to what your current reality is trying to show you. That's the moment you go from being at the mercy of the world to becoming the one who influences it from the inside out. And that is the secret most never discover. Not because it's hidden, but because they were never told where to look. From a young age, most people are trained to believe that life is something they must figure out and respond to. There are rules, systems, and expectations set by society, family, and culture, all reinforcing the idea that the world is out there and you are here, doing your best to manage whatever it throws your way. If something good happens, it's seen as luck or coincidence. If something bad happens, it's a problem to fix or avoid next time. Everything becomes about reacting to people, to news, to circumstances, to outcomes. And in that cycle of constant reaction, something very important gets lost. The truth that you are not just a participant in this world, you are its creator. That may sound unbelievable if you've been reacting your whole life, but that disbelief is part of the very illusion you've been conditioned into. When you're told over and over again that you must hustle, push, and respond to survive, you lose touch with your inner creative power. You forget that your thoughts carry energy, that your beliefs set the stage, and that your emotional state is like a signal being broadcasted at all times. The world isn't random, it's responsive. And if it feels like you keep ending up in the same kinds of situations, it's not because life has it out for you. It's because your state hasn't changed. You can change cities, partners, jobs, or routines, but if your internal state stays the same, you'll keep attracting versions of the same experience. And it's not punishment, it's reflection. Most people aren't aware of the state they're in because they've been taught to look only at results. But results don't create states. States create results. That's the shift. That's the key. And once you begin to understand that you've been reacting from a state, rather than consciously creating a new one, you stop putting all your energy into fixing the outside. You start noticing your internal reactions. You start asking, what must I be assuming to feel this way? What belief am I living from that keeps this situation alive? That's where your power lives, not in controlling the world, but in shifting the inner atmosphere from which you experience it. Because when you go from being reactive to creative, the world outside doesn't stay the same. It begins to mirror the new state you've chosen. And that's not philosophy, that's how it actually works. There's something powerful about starting to see your life, not as a series of random events, but as direct feedback from your inner world. It might sound strange at first, especially if you've been told your whole life that some things are just out of your control. But the deeper truth is that life isn't working against you. It's working with you, constantly giving you clues about where you're operating from internally. Every person you meet, every interaction you have, every repeated pattern or trigger that shows up again and again, it all contains valuable information. Not about the world, but about the version of yourself you've been living from. And once you start looking at life this way, you stop feeling like a victim. You stop seeing problems as signs that something is wrong with you or the world. Instead, you start to recognize them as reflections, clear, often uncomfortable, but incredibly useful reflections that reveal the state you're in. If you keep experiencing rejection, maybe there's a deeper assumption within that says you're not enough. If people treat you like you're invisible, maybe there's a belief you've been carrying that says your voice doesn't matter. The outside world is not judging you, it's showing you what you're believing. That's what it does. It's like a mirror. It doesn't create anything by itself, it only reflects what's already there. That's why trying to manipulate or control the outside world doesn't lead to real change. You can try to be louder, kinder, more successful, or more attractive, but if the belief inside hasn't changed, you'll still be stuck in the same loop. That's not failure, that's feedback. The question becomes, what is this moment trying to teach me about myself? That one question can shift everything. Because when you stop resisting the feedback and start learning from it, you take your power back. You stop blaming others. You stop chasing external validation. You start listening, really listening, to your own inner world. And the moment you hear the story you've been living from, you get to choose whether to keep it or change it. That's not something the world can do for you. That's your power. And when you change the story, when you soften the belief, when you shift the feeling you've been carrying, the world responds. Because it always responds. That's what it's designed to do. Not punish, not control, just reflect. And that's how you know nothing is outside of you. It's all feedback. Imagine standing in front of a mirror and seeing something you don't like. Maybe it's frustration in your eyes or tiredness on your face. Now imagine trying to change that reflection by yelling at it, pleading with it, or asking it to smile. It sounds ridiculous, right? But that's exactly what happens when someone tries to fix their life by changing the people, the circumstances, or the outcomes without ever touching the inner state that created the reflection to begin with. The mirror, just like life, isn't doing anything on its own. It doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have an agenda. It just reflects. That's all it does, and the more you try to argue with it, the more powerless you feel. Not because you're actually powerless, but because you're putting your energy in the wrong place. You don't change the mirror by changing the mirror. You change it by changing what's being reflected. And the same applies to life. If someone ghosts you, if money disappears, if things keep falling apart, don't waste your time yelling at the echo. Don't beg the reflection to behave differently. Instead, pause, step back, go inward. Ask yourself, what am I assuming to be true? What version of me is this reflect? Because the outer world has no choice but to respond to the inner world. That's the law. You don't have to control anyone. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to shift the place you're operating from. The problem is, most people are too busy reacting to the mirror to notice their own reflection. They blame others. They blame timing. They blame luck. But none of that leads to real change. It just creates more noise, more distraction, more chasing. Real change begins when you take your eyes off the surface and start feeling the state you're actually living from. Not the one you pretend to live from. Not the one you affirm out loud. The real one. The one that sits in your chest. The one that whispers when you're tired. The one you carry when no one's looking. That's the state that shapes everything. And that's the one that must shift. Because the mirror can't show something you're not being. It can only reflect the truth you're embodying. And when that truth changes, when your inner dialogue softens, when your assumptions elevate, when your identity begins to heal, the mirror changes too. Not because you forced it to. Not because you finally did enough. But because the reflection has no choice when the image changes. That's why arguing with life is pointless. You're not here to fight reflections. You're here to become the version of you that no longer sees the same struggle staring back. There's something deeply calming that happens when you finally understand that the power you've been chasing was never outside of you. It was always within. That doesn't mean things never feel hard. That doesn't mean you'll never feel lost again. But it does mean that you'll know where to look when you do. Instead of searching for someone to fix you, instead of begging life to finally give you what you want, you pause, you breathe, and you begin to remember. You remember that the outer world is just a screen. What you see on it is being projected from within. And no matter how real it looks, it can only show what's already being imagined, believed, and accepted on the inside. The power to shift your world isn't in forcing outcomes, it's in shifting your state. That's where real creation happens. Not in action alone, not in hustling harder or trying to prove your worth, but in relaxing into the truth that your inner world is the cause, not the effect. So when things don't look the way you want them to, you don't panic. You don't spiral. You go inward. You check your assumptions. You check your tone. You feel the state you've been in, and if it doesn't match what you want, you change it. Not by lying to yourself, but by gently choosing again. You choose to remember who you are. You choose to believe that your desires aren't outside of you. They're within you for a reason. You choose to stop waiting and start being. Because the moment you start living from the state of already having, instead of chasing what's missing, the world begins to catch up. That's not magic. That's alignment. And alignment isn't a technique. It's a way of being. It's about finding peace in the knowing that you don't have to earn what's already yours in consciousness. You just have to allow yourself to become the version of you that lives from it. That version of you doesn't need to control everything. That version doesn't argue with what is. That version simply chooses to embody the state of the solution, even before the evidence appears, and eventually the outer world reflects it, because it always does. That's what it's built to do. And now you know. You don't have to look outside to find the power. You've been carrying it the entire time. At the end of the day, it always comes back to this. The inner world shapes the outer one, not just in theory, not as some nice idea to believe when things are going well, but as a foundational truth that holds, even when nothing outside has changed yet. Because change doesn't begin with proof. It begins with a decision. It begins when you decide to shift how you see yourself, how you speak to yourself, and how you relate to the world. It starts when you stop asking the world to show you something different, and you start showing up as someone different. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You don't need to wait for evidence to feel worthy. You don't need someone else to love you before you feel lovable. You don't need success to feel successful. You just need to shift the state you're living from. And that shift doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's subtle. But the world notices. It always notices, because it reflects the tone you're carrying, even if no one else can see it. And when that tone changes, when you feel a little lighter, a little more certain, a little more grounded, everything else begins to respond. People respond differently. Opportunities begin to flow. Resistance starts to fade. Not because you fought harder, but because you stopped fighting. You started aligning. And that's when things move. The moment you stop arguing with the reflection and begin changing what's being reflected, life can't help but shift, because life mirrors back the version of you that's being most consistently lived. So if you want a new experience, don't chase it, embody it. If you want peace, be still inside. If you want love, open your heart. If you want abundance, assume it's already yours. Not because pretending makes it real, but because being makes it visible. And that's what this whole journey is about. Becoming the version of you that no longer needs the mirror to prove anything. Because that version already knows what's true. And once you live from that truth, the mirror will follow. It always does. If this helped you see life a little differently, tell me in the comments. What is your world reflecting back to you lately? What assumption are you shifting today? I read every message, and I'd love to know what this made you realize. Let's talk in the comments.